And the perfect example of how I think they're controlling the strings of the Congress was, first of all, this year, the invitation to the Prime Minister of Israel to address Congress without State Department okay, without White House okay, and 2 weeks before a domestic political campaign in the state of Israel. Inviting the Prime Minister to come give a political speech before the Congress of the United States 2 weeks before his toughest reelection of his life. What was that followed up by? A letter signed by 47 senators to Iran, not to the president of our country, but to Iran, expressing their deepest problems with what even is not even a deal now of a U.S.-Iran nuclear arms control agreement. And I want one as much as the Israelis, believe you me. I don't want to see Iran develop nuclear weapons. And I have the same concern a lot of our allies in the region have. But by golly, you don't do it, as been described already today, by continuing to spread fear. We saw what happened when Ariel Sharon and George Bush, the son, did that in Iraq. It's Iraq all over again. The falsification of what the threat is, and certainly Iran is not an existential threat to the United States, and it may be to Israel. I'm not going to debate Israel politics on that. But there we find Israel and the United States interests diverging, and they're not one and the same. We can deal with Iran in a little different perspective than can Israel. And we should not have 47 United States senators sending a letter to Iran trying to tell them what the Congress of the United States is going to do and how they're going to override the president, because this is just not in our best interest, in my opinion. Now, the fact that these signers, the fact that the gentleman from Arkansas, the originator of this letter, been in the Senate, what, 49 days? I guess he knows everything about the world. But anyway, the fact that he had to deny that this letter was cooked up in a suite of Sheldon Adelson's in Nevada, the fact that he even had to deny that publicly, I think speaks something, too, about where the origins of this letter really came from. There again, we see a hijacking of our democracy in this country by billionaires intent on controlling the Republican leadership of this Congress that is so disheartening, disconcerting, disastrous, damnable to the best interests of the United States of America and to our foreign policy.
The problem facing the Middle East on all fronts, coming from the United States, Israel, and Saudi Arabia, it seems that certain countries, such as Syria, Libya, Lebanon, Iraq, and other Arab countries that are under the continued assault from the militaries of the U.S. coalition and the Gulf. That leads one country to be left with the final preparations for the destruction of the Shia minority, Iran. Michael Chodosky once wrote in 2013, according to the founding father of Zionism, Theodor Herzl, the area of the Jewish state stretches from the brook of Egypt to the Euphrates. The Promised Land extends from the river of Egypt up to the Euphrates and includes parts of Syria and Lebanon. When viewed in the current context, including the siege on Gaza, the Zionist plan for the Middle East bears an intimate relationship to the 2003 invasion of Iraq, the 2006 war on Lebanon, the 2011 war on Libya and Syria, and the continued crisis in Iraq and Yemen, not to mention the political crisis in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. I had previously done a video concerning about a clean break, which was the strategy for Israel in the 1980s, written by a former senior official with the Israeli Foreign Ministry, Oded Yinon, in which Israel Shahak wrote a foreword, in which I will quote. The following essay represents, in my opinion, the accurate and detailed plan of the present Zionist regime of Ariel Sharon for the Middle East, which is based on the division of the whole area into small states and the dissolution of all the existing Arab states. I will comment on the military aspect of this plan in a concluding note. Here, I want to draw the attention of the readers to several important points. One, the idea that all Arab states should be broken down by Israel into small units occurs again and again in Israeli strategic thinking. For example, Ze'ev Schiff, the military correspondent of Haaretz, writes about the best that can happen for Israel interests in Iraq: the dissolution of Iraq into a Shiite state, a Sunni state, and the separation of the Kurdish part. Two, the strong connection with neoconservative thought in the U.S. is very prominent, especially in the author notes. But while lip service is paid to the idea of the defense of the West from Soviet power, the real aim of the author and of the present Israeli establishment is clear: to make an imperial Israel into a world power. In other words, the aim of Ariel Sharon is to deceive the Americans after he has deceived all the rest. Three, it is obvious that much of the relevant data, both in the notes and in the text, is garbled or omitted, such as the financial help of the U.S. to Israel. Much of it is pure fantasy. But the plan is not to be regarded as not influential or as not capable of realization for a short time. The plan follows faithfully the geopolitical strategy in Germany of 1890 to 1933, which was swallowed whole by Hitler and the Nazi movement and determined their aims for East Europe. Those aims, especially the division of the existing states, were carried out in 1939 to 1941, and only an alliance of the global scale prevented their consolidation for a period of time. The notes by the author follow the text to avoid confusion. I did not add any notes of my own, but have put the substance of them into this forward and the conclusion at the end. I have, however, emphasized some portion of the text. The argument of the Oded Yinon plan was that Yinon had argued that the world was witnessing a new epoch in history without precedent, which required both the development of a fresh perspective and an operational strategy to implement it. The nationalist and humanist foundations of Western civilization were in a state of collapse. And in the 1980s, the West was disintegrating before the combined onslaught of the Cold War into the Soviet Union and the Third World, a phenomenon he believed was accompanied by an upsurge in anti-Semitism, all of which meant that Israel would become the last safe haven for Jews to seek refuge in. And so he had a couple of blueprints for the Middle East, which included Egypt, Jordan, the West Bank, Lebanon, and Iraq. His publication was actually celebrated, one of which was by William Haddad, an American political operative and lobbyist, in which he caused the publication to become an uproar, a celebration of sorts that the United States Neoconservative Party would grow in tantamount with the Israeli Zionists for the control of the Middle East. Yehoshaphat Hakabi was a chief of Israeli intelligence from 1955 to 1959, appraised Yinon's analysis of the weakness of Arab states as generally correct while expressing doubts about the suggestion Israel should actively work towards their dissolution. He went on to say that if their fragmentation is inevitable, why would it be necessary for Israel to interfere? Mordecai Nissan, an Israeli professor and member of the World Zionist Organization, notes that the Oded Yinon plan made waves, stirring both curiosity and wrath. the latter of which had fed into regional suspicions that Israel was intent on balkanizing the neighborhood. Nissan thought the original outcry both exaggerated and incredulous. Yinon's apparent suggestion that Israel adopt an interventionist role to abet the fragmentation of Arab states, the author thought inevitable, in which he added, served to create an impression that Israel was engaged in a sinister plot. When the views expressed were Yinon's alone, it did not represent Israeli government policy. However, he did have favor with the ardent Zionist movement. The Greater Israel consists in an area extending from the Nile Valley to the Euphrates. And according to Stephen Landman, a near century ago, the World Zionist Organization's plans for a Jewish state included historic Palestine, South Lebanon up to Sudan and the Litani River, Syrian's Golan Heights, Harun Plain, and Deraa, and control of the Hijaz Railway from Deraa to Amman, Jordan, as well as the Gulf of Aqaba. Some Zionists wanted more land from the Nile in the west to the Euphrates in the east, compromising Palestine, Lebanon, western Syria, and southern Turkey. The Zionist project had supported the Jewish settlement movement, and more broadly, it involves a policy of excluding Palestinians from Palestine, leading to the annexation of both the West Bank and Gaza to the state of Israel. The Greater Israel Project would create a number of proxy states, and it would include parts of Lebanon, Jordan, Syria, and the Sinai, as well as parts of Iraq and Saudi Arabia. In an article written by Mahai Darius Narezamba in 2011, the Yinon Plan was a continuation of Britain's colonial design in the Middle East. Quote, the Yinon Plan is an Israeli strategic plan to ensure Israeli regional superiority, and it insists and stipulates that Israel must reconfigure its geopolitical environment through the balkanization of the surrounding Arab states into smaller and weaker states, end quote. And of course, viewed in this context, the war on Syria and Iraq, which ended, is part of the process of Israeli territorial expansion. How else can we explain Israel's continued attack on Iran and Hezbollah in Syria, while both of the latter were trying to destroy the militants from Saudi Arabia from taking control of the country? Wouldn't it be to Israel's interests to help them in the regard of destroying remnants of the Islamic State and Jabhat al-Nusra? In this regard, the defeat of US-sponsored terrorists like ISIS and al-Nusra by Syrian forces with the support of Russia, Iran, and Hezbollah constitute a setback, and a significant one, for Israel. Why? Because ISIS and al-Nusra and other Saudi proxy forces backed by the CIA, approved by Israel and Jordan, are carrying out the plans made by Oded Yinon and the World Zionist Organization. Israel's official position in the Syrian civil war had been strict neutrality. But in July of 2017, Israel's defense minister, Avigdor Lieberman, said that while the rebels are not our friends, they are all versions of al-Qaeda. Israel could not allow a man like Bashar al-Assad to remain in power. Keeping Assad in power is not in our security interests. As long as he is in power, Iran and Hezbollah will be in Syria. Now, I tell you, my friends, what constitutes a greater threat to Israel's foreign policy? Is it al-Qaeda and the Islamic State, which considers Israel the enemy and considers other Arabs who are not within the Wahhabi tradition as the enemy as well? Or Hezbollah, an apolitical militant faction of Lebanon, Iran, as well as proxy forces from Syria, which cause no international threat and do not hate their Jewish counterparts. Iran is home to the second largest populace of Jews in the world. So why is it that the Israeli Zionist government, led by the corrupt House of Saud, continued their assault on the Shia minority in Lebanon, Syria, and Iran? One only needs to look at the old adage and the documents of Oded Yinon and the World Zionist Organization plan to reconstitute the Arab states so that they can have control of the region at the expense of US soldiers and Arab civilians.